FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
And we are back on the Financial Survival Network. Special treat. I've not talked to my old friend Jay Taylor since I moved down to Florida. In fact, he didn't even know I'd moved here. It's been too long. Jay, it's great to talk to you again.
It's good to talk to you, Kerry.
Hey, and man, we're watching the whole unfolding, the unraveling here of the petrodollar in 3D, aren't we?
It seems to be the case, Kerry. You know, when Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, there had to be something to support the dollar. And of course, Kissinger and the ruling elite in America made arrangements with Saudi Arabia. And of course, we want everybody in the world to use the dollar if they trade in oil. And there have been some people that I've talked to on my own radio show, John Perkins, for example, I think you've probably spoken to him as well, is quite convinced that we've entered into wars, perhaps in part in Iraq, because Saddam Hussein wanted to use something. He wanted to sell his oil for euros. So in order to keep this scam alive, this dollar scam, which the dollar created out of nothing, there had to be trade based. The dollar had to be used around the world as the world's reserve currency because it didn't really have the intrinsic value. And so, the geopolitical issue, I think, that's coming into play now, though, there's a lot of blowback or pushback against this, and countries that are competing for the world's resources with us, primarily China and some of the Asian countries with China primarily. And of course, Russia feels like it's being cornered right now as the United States and as NATO is pushing up against its borders, going way beyond what we agreed to do at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. And so, it seems to be forming an alliance now between Russia and China and Iran, of course, in part of that, and even India. It seems as though institutions are coming together, Kerry. I don't know if you followed it, but it seems to me that they're putting petroleum exchanges in place in Asia and also gold. Both those countries have been accumulating, and China has been accumulating huge amounts of gold, but Russia has too been accumulating gold, building up their gold reserves. And the institutions that are being put in place, I understand that Shanghai is going to have a free trade exchange that will allow foreigners to buy and sell gold as well. But interestingly enough, Alistair McLeod came on my own radio show the other day and talked about how he, according to his numbers, he thinks the Chinese may have accumulated as much as 13,000 tons of gold over the last number of years. And that's more than the U.S. Treasury has. So something, I think, and the Chinese have never made any bones about, neither of the Russians, about wanting to get rid of the dollar. So I think the petrodollar's days and then, may be numbered, Kerry. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking that's probably correct. And, it's outlived its usefulness. And really, when you look at the deficits and they're financing the deficits, what do they get from it now? What's the benefit to China and to Russia and the rest of the world? It's effectively become a wealth redistribution mechanism where we take the rest of the world's wealth and it comes to the U.S. in the form of flat screen TVs and consumer goods. And, the concept, I guess, before was it was a protection racket. We gave the world protection from the Soviet Union during the Cold War, but now they're really not that much of a threat. So what's the benefit for Europe and the rest of the world making these transfer payments to the U.S.?
Yeah, and one thing, Kerry, that I find very, very interesting is that Putin put into effect a 13% flat tax. Boy, would I love to have a 13% flat tax in America now compared to what I have to pay. I don't know how you feel about that. But when you talk about the respect for private property, you cannot say that the United States government is more in favor of or is more protective of property rights than Putin is. Can you?
No, I mean, the U.S. came in number 12 in economic freedom last year, and it's dropping further and further behind. And you can see the day coming where it's going to come in dead last on the list, somewhere around where Zimbabwe and Iran are on the list.
Yeah, if it keeps going in this direction, I have no idea where Russia would fit into that to that list. I probably still below us, but nonetheless, the direction is clear. It seems to me, and I don't like the direction. And property rights, and there's recently the story of the rancher out in Nevada, the United States Interior Department going in with guns ablazing apparently, and taking his cattle and getting him off of his land. And I'm hearing that what we are doing now is using this BLM land as pledge to the Chinese in order to keep the Chinese from selling dollars. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I'm going to have someone on my own radio show talking about that. Have you heard anything about that, Kerry?
Well, there was some type of deal with Harry Reid and his son, and they were going to set up these big solar generating plants, electrical plants.
Yes.
And it was on the BLM website. And then when all hell broke loose there at that ranch, they pulled the documents down. But this was part of a mitigation zone, his ranch, and they wanted to take the trespassing cattle off of there. So basically, 5,000 people showed up to protest what the BLM was doing, and a lot of these people were armed. They went out to the ranch, and then they had already confiscated the BLM several hundred head of his cattle, this guy Bundy. They went out to the pen where they were holding the cattle, and there were 100 armed federal agents there, and they had a showdown, and they just took the cattle back and repatriated them, and pretty much the feds backed off because they wanted to go home to their wives and their families that day. And I don't think this thing is over. We'll see how much force they come out in next time, but obviously it's an election year, and it wasn't going to do them any good to have a Waco type event in an election year.
Oh, for sure. But what I find interesting about this, if this account is correct, is that during the blow up in 2008, the financial crisis, that Paulson pleaded with the Chinese not to dump dollars or to dump Fannie and Freddie securities onto the market, and that the United States ever since has been sort of beholden to, as debtors, beholden to the Chinese. And the tie-in here, according to this one account that I've been paying some attention to, is that this is sort of a protection, or let's say a bribe to the Chinese to keep them from dumping dollars. And this gets back to the whole issue of the petrodollar and the worthlessness of the dollar. And if if it isn't tied to something, in this case oil, you have to wonder. And then the mechanisms are being set up for trading of oil and gold between China and Russia. And there's no doubt about it. I mean, it's open in the press that what we are doing with NATO, pushing the NATO alliance closer and closer to the Russian border, is really causing alarm in Russia and is driving the Russian and the Chinese closer together, not to mention the Iranians and possibly India as well.
Yeah, it seems to be counterproductive. And, I don't know what the point of this policy is, but final analysis, it's a declining empire, and they're grasping at straws. And I don't know that a war is going to really serve our interests here.
Well, it probably serves somebody's interest in terms of selling weapons and making money. I suppose one could go out and buy defense stocks if you wanted to. I know my good friend Richard Mayberry, he's a libertarian as we are, but I think Richard's idea is that this is inevitable. It's going to keep spreading, and that that's one way to make money. You can't stop it anyway, so you may as well make money on it. I have a problem doing that with my own conscience, but I guess on the one hand, I don't know. How do you feel about that, Kerry? If you could make a lot of money, in defense stocks.
Well, you could make money in cigarette stocks too.
Yeah.
I guess there's an argument to be made for it, but it's kind of like, I don't know.
I'd rather make money in gold.
Yeah, same here. And it looks like this whole crash in the dollar it's going to be speeded up. And, Martin Armstrong, the other cycle guys see it, I don't know about Armstrong, but Nenner sees it happening as early as the third quarter of this year or first quarter of 2015. But, you could see a hit in the dollar as high as 50, 60%. And if you're holding defense stocks and the dollar takes a 50% hit, that's pretty substantial, huh?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I guess that is the whole issue is trying to keep the status quo in place. And obviously, the ruling elite, that's what they want to do. And so clearly, because if this thing goes into reverse, I think, Kerry, it could go very, very rapidly. It almost got away from them. I think during Lehman Brothers, they managed to stop it just in time. But I think, clearly nothing has been fixed since then. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Nothing has changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. Let's face it. You know that.
Yeah.
More debt. More
yeah,
debt.
More debt, and it's debt money. That's the point. And just as England basically had to give up its empire because it was indebted, I think that's where the United States is now. And now we're beholden. I mean, it's sort of the way it is. If you are the debtor, you are at a disadvantage. That's why it's sort of good for individuals as well as countries not to enter into debt, at least beyond anything they can service. So that's where we're at. But I think this is hugely bullish for gold. I was reading James Rickard's latest book called The Death of Money, and I'm going to have him on my show next week, actually. And he was talking about, theoretically, what we need to see is a price of gold something like $17,500 to go back to a gold standard of sorts between Europe and the United States, just for those countries. So he's not predicting that, but he's just saying in order for it to work, that's what the price of gold would have to be. So I don't know. Nobody knows where this is going to go, right, Kerry? But it seems to me that you want to own tangible assets, because if the dollar does go down that 50 or 60% you're suggesting could be possible, then God help us. I mean, we better have something that's real and not paper in a bank, especially in a bank, I would say.
Oh, for sure. And hey, we're going to talk more about this up next. And Jay's got a really interesting mining company that he wants to talk about on the Financial Survival Network.
FSN Radio.
Are you worried about protecting your wealth against a dollar collapse? Worried about gold confiscation? Owings Metals provides wearable wealth solutions that will keep your wealth safe from a declining dollar and from a government that's getting more desperate by the day. The Indians have understood this for thousands of years. Americans are just starting to catch on. When you wear an Owings Metals 24-karat piece of jewelry, you can safely cross borders and take your wealth with you. Best of all, it's insurable, and unlike a lot of Indian jewelry, it's very durable. It can easily be disassembled and sold off in pieces if you need cash. It's surprisingly affordable and definitely should have a place in your wealth diversification strategy. Precious metals are like so many other types of insurance. You only find out how important and essential they are after disaster strikes. Call Owings Metals now at 855-604-6343. 855-604-6343. Don't wait until it's too late. 855-604-6343 now.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
And we are back. We're talking with Jay Taylor, jtaylormedia.com. So, Jay, enough of the depressing matters like the death of the petrodollar and therefore the dollar as well. You've got an interesting mining company that you wanted to share with us.
Oh, yes, I do, Kerry. And I've been writing my newsletter since 1981. So I've been at it a long time. And I must say that I have not found a more interesting story and potentially a more compelling story than one company called Novo Resources, traded in Toronto under the symbol NVO. And you can buy it in the United States under the symbol NSRPF, as I have done, and I have recommended it in my newsletter. Now, let me just say before I go any further that this is a speculative stock. It is not something that you should bank on, but I think it has absolutely spectacular upside potential, and the exploration work that's done by its CEO, Dr. Quinton Henning, is really suggesting that he is on to something potentially very, very big. Now, let me just explain what he's doing. There is the greatest gold mine ever discovered on Earth is the Witwatersrand mine in South Africa. There have been 1.6 billion ounces of gold produced from that mine. Another, Quinton tells me, another 1 billion pretty much in the resource or in the ground yet. It goes back to the early days of the mining industry in South Africa, essentially. But There has, as I say, never been that amount of gold in any one place ever before discovered in the face of the earth. Now, Quinton was always sort of uneasy about the explanation, the sort of geological explanations that were given for the amount of gold that was there. He just, he looked at other models that were being applied to the Witwatersrand. He said, but none of them come even close, anything close to 1.6 billion ounces. So he started. He was when he was a graduate school student at the Colorado School of Mines. He was grinding up and working on some Witwatersrand rock, and he found that there was all these carbon chunks in the rock that had gold inside the carbon. The carbon attracted the gold, apparently. So that got him to thinking about maybe the gold at the Witwatersrand was deposited as a precipitation, much as some of the major copper mines have been formed in the past, some 200 or 300 million years later. Now, the key to this, according to Quinton, was his theory was that going back 2.7 to 3 billion years ago, the Earth had very little oxygen. That's just when plants started being formed and photosynthesis started to occur, and so oxygen started to occur. And he points out that oxygen is required in the water in order to settle out the gold. So his theory is that there was a huge amount of gold in the ocean, in the seawater, and that as the oxygen started to form in the water, then you started to have the gold settling out and being attracted by the carbon layers that were also starting to appear with the growth of plant life at the bottom of these shallow seabeds. So Quinton's view was that you needed to have two conditions in order to find another Witwatersrand. You had to find a deposit. You had to find an ancient shallow seabed, but it had to be 2.7 to 3 billion years of age so that it fit into that time period when oxygen was being formed so the gold could be sucked or settled out of the ocean water. And so his research took him around, and he had worked a number of years with Newmont Mining. His research took him to Australia. In the northern part of Australia, northwestern part of Australia, there is a basin there that is called the Pilbara. The Pilbara Bay, or the Hamersley Basin in the north. There's a Pilbara region in which the rocks are the right age, and that's where he started to do his work. And lo and behold, his very, very early work, he has discovered the carbon chunks, the gold contained in the carbon chunks. And he just started just recently, and he slowed up a little bit because raising money and all that was difficult in the last couple of years. But some very early shallow drilling brought him they have a 43-101 resource of 421,000 ounces of gold, grading a little over about 1.5 grams. Now, the point about this is that the target is absolutely huge because we're talking about a shallow seabed that is very, very large, and we're talking about something at surface, outcropping at surface, and dipping at only about 1 degree. This has attracted Newmont. In fact, the biggest shareholder is Newmont Mining, which owns 32% of this stock. The management owns another more than 50. So with Newmont and the management, it's well over 50% of the stock. There's not many shares outstanding. I think there was 55 million shares outstanding. Newmont is actually sending their own people down on their own dime to do mapping and sampling of the outcrop to test to set up the targets, the drill targets. I think this is a story. There's another very well-known geologist. I won't mention his name because he hasn't recommended it to his own subscribers. But I talked to him about this, and he's very, very bullish on it. Hasn't really talked to his own subscribers because he's too close to the story and believes it would constitute insider information. I'm not saying that this is a slam dunk, Kerry, but to me, the potential here is absolutely huge. And what Quinton told me, he says he thinks the reason Newmont really loves it is because of the 1% dip. That means that this thing is not going to go to great depth, which means the economics of mining it should be much better. So Newmont is down there now, as I understand it, doing some surface work, tracing the outcrops. It is a story that I've told. It sort of is attractive to people that are in the industry. I think the people that are following him most are really the the mining pros that can sort of grasp and understand it. But he may very well be on to another Witwatersrand deposit. And the way I look at it, with the market cap not out of this world at this stage, the stock is now selling at around $1.70, I think, Canadian. That there's 421,000 ounces already with just the very minimal amount of drilling done so far. That the downside may not be all that great, even if it turns out not to be anything akin to the Witwatersrand. But if it is, this is absolutely a mind-boggling moonshot. And investors should really realize that this is not proven, and it's very tight. I mean, the stock is moving 2 or 3%. I mean, it'll move 8-10 cents a day on very, very limited volume. I talked to Bob Moriarty about this, and he said Quinton back in 2008, he was traveling with Quinton in Australia, and Quinton had this theory back then, but he didn't have enough evidence to talk about it. And Bob says, I tried to get him to talk about it, but he wouldn't. And I told Bob, well, the reason I think is he didn't have enough evidence. Now he's come up with the drilling, the carbon, hosting gold, and everything is sort of falling into place so far. That doesn't mean it's mineralized anything like the Witwatersrand, which, by the way, I understand dips at something like 17% or something like that. So anyway, it is a fantastic story. It is, as I say, one of the most interesting stories that I've covered since I started writing my newsletter in 1981, Kerry, and that's sort of the basis of it, but I'm watching it very, very carefully.
Well, it sounds really exciting, and after the pain that these mining stocks have gone through, there's some real gems there, and this really sounds like one of them. And that's the reason why people should be looking at your newsletter, Jay, because you cover them well, and you've got great screening and filtering capabilities to steer people in the direction of the companies that have managed to weather the storm and that have got sound financials and have managed to get through this period of challenge. Not just any company could make it through this, right?
No, absolutely right. And that's why I think right now, Kerry, and thank you for those compliments, by the way, but I think that's why I think right now is one of the most exciting times, even aside from Novo Gold, which Novo Resources, which I really think is exceptional. That's a different story. But in general, you're right. I think there's a tremendous buying opportunity right now. Only if you believe that gold is dead. If you buy the mainstream propaganda that gold is a barbaric relic and there's no place for it in the modern world, then okay, fine. Then don't buy these things. But if you believe, as Kerry and I do, that fiat money is a fraud and it ultimately will self-destruct, then you want to go back to the real thing that's been used since biblical times, going back 4,000 years ago or so, to what is proven by the markets have demanded gold and silver as money, and I think ultimately will do so again, Kerry.
No question, Jay. So we got to take off, but jtaylormedia.com, that's where you find Jay's work, his radio show, and financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Don't forget, sign up for the free newsletter. Jay, we'll talk to you soon. Be well.
Thank you, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.